All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, the London is Blue podcast. Stan, one of your hosts here. No Brandon, no Nick, but the wonderful, the amazing, the ever-detailed, the author of the London is Blue Dispatch, Sam, CFC Central, back, bringing you, and all of us really, an update on the first three matches under Mauricio Pochettino, what the aura is, what the vibe is of what we're seeing on the pitch, trying to pull together some trends. And I think there was even the question, Sam, could we identify trends over three matches? I would say there's enough data, but you might disagree. So, is it a trend, or is it more just a leading indicator that we're about to talk about today?
Hey, Dan. Absolutely amazing and buzzing to be back on the podcast after a little bit of a hiatus. But hope everybody's enjoying the dispatches, and it's been good to get back to writing. It's something that I enjoy more than listening to my voice back on the podcast. But it's. I think we've got a slight indicator of where Pochettino's reign is going to go. I wouldn't really count on the system too much, but in terms of how he's improved the players, how each individual is looking, I think we've got a good sense of how things might go over the season, and I would dare say that I'm optimistic. So I'm really hoping that everybody else listening in sort of shares that optimism with me.
And you're generally optimistic, so I feel like for you to say that you're optimistic, that might be even a double down on the level of optimism we might and should have around what Chelsea could accomplish this season.
No, I'm definitely a glass always full kind of person. So yeah, it's just been I've been trying to pick out the best kind of things that are available to me, and it is encouraging. I think based on when we were together in the US and we were watching preseason, you could already see that the foundations were being laid, and that has luckily, and I would say thankfully, just continued into the new season. Some tenets in terms of just how well he's profiling certain players, not just the ones that were there in preseason, but the ones who've come in also. It just looks like the manager is very switched on in terms of the tools at his disposal and how he wants to use them. So he's not taking an axe and using it to peel potatoes, which is very encouraging.
Well, we will leave the culinary or woodcutting situations to the side for now, but we will advance into a conversation, taking a look at the first three matches in a bit of a high-level overview. And then we want to talk about just some of the larger patterns or trends we're seeing that are coming from your listener questions. So as always, we love when you engage with us on X, on Instagram, when you can send us in questions. But we also have other ways that you can engage and support the podcast as well. Leaving a 5-star review is always appreciated, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, or any app that allows you to leave a review. Also, you can join our wonderful Patreon community. It's part of our with Discord. That's patreon.com/LondonBluePod. And hey, jump onto YouTube, subscribe. It's free. Get notified when we drop a new video or new pod. That's also free. And leave a comment over there. Also something free that you can do that helps support the podcast, and we really appreciate it. We're getting very, very close to 30,000 subscribers over there. We'd love to hit that as a milestone. It's been a big month for us, particularly with all of the pods we've been dropping. You know, we had our Luton review, we had a Petrovic special, we had Phil, Chelsea Youth, back on recently to talk about what's going on in the academy. There's just a whole lot more that we are coming out with in the next few days too, particularly as we get close to the end of the transfer window. So please, please, please engage with us. Let us know what's going on. Let us know what you like so we can continue creating a great show for you. But as we get into it, Sam, as we talk about the stage that we are setting, Chelsea have three results. They have a win, they have a loss, and they have a draw, which, if you argue, Luton, West Ham, Liverpool, it almost feels like it might have been expected that Chelsea would end up with a 1-1-1 record over the first three matches, particularly with multiple late arrivals into the team, an incomplete squad, a short-ish preseason for Pochettino to get all of his ideas across the team, and maybe some of the other squads we went up against being more complete or more ready to start their Premier League campaign with having the same manager, having a lot of the same players, having a system in place. We might argue that maybe the results are a little different. Maybe we would have lost to Liverpool or drawn with West Ham and then beaten Luton. I think Luton was the one everybody had penciled in as a win. And so just maybe before we get into some of the specifics in those matches, just generally, is this where you would expect us to be, or do you feel like we are at the expectation, above the expectation, or below the expectation where you thought we might be based upon preseason?
Well, for the perennial optimist, I will splash a little water and go and say that I think we're slightly below expectations. I do believe that obviously injuries have affected what we've been able to put out in terms of the plan that was there in preseason versus the execution. But I do believe that we should have won the West Ham game. I do believe that we should have done better in the Liverpool game. We did really, really well to come back from a goal down, and by the end of it, Klopp was reeling, didn't know what to do. But I think that we could have achieved more, and I think it's a very good feeling that I, of all people, is sort of advocating towards that, because I'm generally more sanguine. I'll say, okay, give it more time. But it did feel like Poch has created a team that's able to compete physically and in terms of intensity and even excel compared to some very good teams, which is extremely encouraging for us going forward. But I do think that we should have had at least 2 wins and maybe 1 draw going ahead. But like you said, a 1-1-1 is probably in hindsight, a fairer reflection of where we should be. But I would say that going forward, again, especially the fixtures that we have, Forest is not going to be easy. But hopefully we will be able to convert those slight margins and turn towards victory. So I'm being a little more on the harsher side, where I expect this squad, this young squad, which is physically drilled and looks much better than its competitors, to actually convert those into good results.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that as we get into maybe the more specifics of each of the match. We know that in the Liverpool match in particular, that we hadn't gotten Caicedo across the line yet. That was still about to be done and fully resolved in the Caicedo derby, the Lavia derby, however you want to frame it. Chelsea won off the pitch, even if we couldn't get a win in terms of the result on the pitch. But that was where we saw the first little bit of makeshift action happening from Pochettino with the inavailability of some of the players. We know that Nkunku was ruled out a little bit before that in terms of the injury that he had, which was a massive bummer considering how exciting, how electric he looked during preseason. And Pochettino went with that 4-2-3-1 that everybody thought was the back three. But obviously, maybe we could just talk about that in terms of I think we got asked the question a couple of times, is it truly a back three that Chelsea are playing? Pochettino said, no, it's a back four. I think we tend to say it's a back four, but maybe we can just enumerate a little bit around why it is the way it is, and why does the Premier League continue, or why does SofaScore continue putting 3 back on the way that they generate their lineups?
So interestingly, Poch himself clarified this, and I think it was an interview with the club website where he said that we want to basically, when we're attacking, we want to have 3 at the back. So we make sure that we've got an extra man and make sure that we're solid on transitions. So it is actually a back 4. It's just we're practicing different shapes. And even through within the different courses of the game, we've also seen us become more adventurous. So we've gone from what you might think is a 3-5-3 2-4-1 to a 3-1-4-2, and we've switched it up. We've got 2 forwards sometimes. We've basically got only 1 DM. If you watch the Luton game back, at one point in time, Caicedo was there in defensive midfield by himself with the 3 centre backs behind him. This happened against the West Ham game as well, where unfortunately it cost us because we were trying to push for a goal and West Ham just stood back, made sure that they were capitalizing on transitions. But the back 3 is not a back 3, to be honest. It is a back 4. Colwill is a left back. He's also a centre back. It's pretty similar to what Graham Potter did in his first couple of games. I think it was against Salzburg that he played Kukureya in that role. But those ideas are quite different. The execution is quite different, but it's definitely a back 4, I would say.
Well, I'm glad we cleared that up for everybody. I think that's very important. But let's talk about some of the things from that game, just at a high level that we saw that maybe continued into the future games. We know we saw the space that Chilwell was creating for Enzo. We saw some progression out of the back, and particularly with the passers that Chelsea have from a center back offering can do a lot more than maybe some other teams in the Premier League. It feels like we saw how the defenders were going to be critical to the point you made there around Poch clarifying the three at the back when we're in attack. It's really about how the defenders are setting up the defenders to actually kickstart or be involved in the attacking phase of the game just as much as they are in making sure that the defense is staying rock solid.
No, definitely. I think what people have to sort of switch on to here is not just see as, a left winger position as a position. Like, you wouldn't want to see it as an attacker playing there, but there are certain responsibilities that are required even from your left winger, which first of all that you mentioned was to create space for Enzo. So if you watch the Luton game back, there were moments where Chilwell was basically moving right next to Jack centre backs and draw the fullback who was marking Chilwell inside. So not so far, the Luton right back was basically trying to get a little scrunched up, and it basically pinned the back line to a point where the left pocket, that half space on the left-hand side for us, was where Enzo was dropping. And those are the angles that he loves the most. That's because Chilwell was moving away from that zone, away from the left wing position, and actually shunting inside, trying to squeeze the line and making sure that your most creative player on the pitch had time to receive, time to put his head up and basically pick the passes that he wanted. And most of it was Sterling trying to make a far post run. So the space that is being created for Enzo is thanks to Chilwell. And those are the tactical things we talk about. Can Mudryk do that? Or is he somebody who's just waiting for the ball to come to him and then trying to take on people? How does that look when West Ham are playing in a 5-4-1? Is he able to go past, a full back, two centre backs and create some kind of a threat? Probably no. And that's why, we saw definitely Chilwell come in and offer a little more tactical interpretation to it. He actually did some really, really good things. He was a very good off the ball threat. He was making runs in behind so far. And at one point he got two headers on the far post, and one went very narrowly wide from a cross. I think it was Gusto or it was Enzo on the right hand side who picked him out, and he almost scored from there. So he is doing the right things. It's just this formation is more dependent on players doing certain responsibilities, and we don't have to look at it as why is a centre back playing left back or why is a left back playing left wing. It's just about, are they doing their responsibilities right? And I would say up until this point, I would say that they've done very well considering we have 9 injuries.
So when you define that, can you go a little bit deeper around, like, in this system, like, what is the expectation of someone like Colwell, who I think it received maybe a fair bit of criticism during the first game in particular for playing as a left back, but I think you're kind of highlighting the fact that he's not really a left back. He is a center back who is shifting to the left as a part of the buildup that we have when we're in attack. And this is what he's shifting more to like a left center back in this role. So, like, what would his responsibility be or his assignment be to help clarify for people, like, what is he actually expected to do and why is that maybe challenging him in this, first series of starts under Mauricio Pochettino and at Chelsea?
So interestingly, the 3 people at the back that we've got, Disasi, Silva and Colville, actually rank in very, very highly in terms of progressive passes, passing distance for outfielders. So Thiago Silva is actually first among the Premier League for distance. Only Edison, even in goalkeepers, only Edison is somebody who's covered more progressive distance than him with his passes. Disasi is 7th, Enzo Fernandez is 9th, and then Colville is 18th. So it just tells you about how Pochettino has recognized that he's got a lot of good ball-playing centre-backs who are able to offer great penetration against, the first line. Even when they're in settled possession and close to the halfway line, they're able to find good passes. If you see the kind of line-breaking passes that Colville was picking out for Chilwell in the first couple of games, it was extremely amazing to see. So Colville's role, I would say, is multifold. He is, like you mentioned, when he's defending, he's a third centre-back. So he obviously has to function as a centre-back, making sure that he's guarding against transition. We all know that he's extremely quick. He's also somebody who likes to stand off a little bit. So he's reading people's intentions Didn't do very well on that goal that we conceded from Disasi's mistake. But again, this is him learning and taking on a lot of experience over the past year, so that will improve. But he's basically done that role as a centre back. And there were times against the West Ham game where he left the centre back position and he was almost at left midfield. So he was um, almost a defensive midfielder. He was waiting for the ball to come loose and basically win the ball back and recycle it so we could keep the pressure on. And there were, I think, 2 instances which I logged where Colwell basically overlapped on the left-hand side, almost like a left back would. Saying he crossed also inside the box, but I didn't think it made it. It went out for a corner. But that's the role that has been asked of him. And Kukurea has also done something similar against Potter. Like when we were playing under Potter, he was tasked with doing this exact same responsibility. But I think Colwell's a safer bet for obvious reasons. It's a difficult role to play. It's something that we've seen Pochettino's system do. I think there are demands from players to do multiple roles. Caicedo will have multiple roles. Enzo will have multiple roles. The number 10 is not a number 10. He's like Carney Chukwuemeka, a box-to-box midfielder. So he sometimes has to be an 8, sometimes has to be a 6. He has to help in build-up. So he's got multiple responsibilities as well. So what we've basically seen is a 4-2-3-1, but it's the namesake. And there are players playing multiple roles and allowing different solutions in game, which I think is my interpretation of what Pochettino wants to do.
Well, and maybe just to lastly summarize on the learnings from the Liverpool match is we saw that it was a midfield 2 combo effectively of Enzo and Gallagher basically alternating where they were in terms of the pivot switch that they were offering. One was further forward, one was further back, and they were alternating throughout the match. But then you had the Chukwuemeka and I guess Mudryk offering because of Mudryk coming in on halftime, where they were supporting the attacking movements that Enzo and Gallagher were getting into. And I think that was interesting. We know that, maybe as we talk about the other matches shortly, that we are less likely to see the 2 or the pairing necessarily of like just Enzo and Gallagher plus some supporting cast, and it's going to evolve, particularly as we've seen Caicedo, Enzo, and Gallagher working as a trio in the most recent match.
Yeah, I think the Liverpool game was an interesting starting point because we didn't have Caicedo, so it was again Pochettino working with what he had. And interestingly, it was, I think, Enzo playing on the right-hand side in that game. And I mean, he's just so good that he can pick out angles even from the right-hand side. I do insist that the left-hand side is, I think, where he prefers because he pulls out some incredible through balls with the outside of his foot. He's able to sort of look for diagonal switches on the right-hand side first time. I think those things, he is not very inclined to look on the right, but on the left, he is almost very switched on to what is happening. But even on the right-hand side against Liverpool, it was arguably a man-of-the-match performance. But it was, again, Gallagher tasked with being the deepest midfielder, which we all know he doesn't like, and struggled a little bit. But other than that, he, again, grew into the game, looked very, very solid by the end. But as soon as we had Caicedo, I think that the idea, again, evolved, and we saw, again, a positional shift. And it's again, when we saw against Luton and we didn't have Chukwuemeka and we didn't have anybody in that attacking midfield role, we basically didn't see a number 10 as such. We saw Gallagher with a more different interpretation. I would say it was almost a midfield 3 at times where you had Enzo, who had almost an 8 role where he was just free roaming and trying to find pockets. You had Caicedo as the deepest midfielder, almost as the number 6. And then Gallagher was playing almost a box-to-box role on the right-hand side. And again, Pochettino knows that, like, there are some defensive midfielders who like to orchestrate and have more space. Like, sometimes people don't like playing in a double pivot because if you're an orchestrator, you have somebody who's occupying half the pitch and you want to be able to create those angles, receive, and then, try to find players in front. And I think he's given that freedom to Enzo, saying that Caicedo and Gallagher will take care of those responsibilities. Your job is to just find the space behind the first or the second line, receive, turn, and then play. And a lot of the balls that he delivered to Sterling and Jackson have been just that. And it's that added level of freedom that he's given Enzo. I think the identification there of saying, no, he's not somebody who has to be given a defined role. He needs a little more freedom. He's got the intelligence to escape pressure. I think that's what has been a hallmark for me. And as we see that midfield partnership, like I said, evolve, I think that will remain common. It'll be Caicedo and Gallagher providing the base, and Enzo basically being an 8-10. He's just given the freedom to be where he wants to be. At times, he's making runs into the box, which we didn't see last season. He's also looking lighter and fitter, so he's able to make those sprints quickly into the box. He also hit the post, I think, against Luton on a counter-attack, which was, again, something we didn't see last season. So, those positions that he's taking up are all results from the positional freedom that he has. And I think that's something definitely that we need to watch out for. We were talking about us not getting enough goals from midfield. Gallagher has got 8 goals and 4 assists, I think, at Crystal Palace from a similar position, like a 6-8 B2B. And Enzo's had, a season at River Plate where he, I think, got about 8 or 10 goals in the League Cup or something. So there are goals there. And I think giving that level of freedom to two midfielders is again, him trying to explore how much he can push these two guys to get into the box and get us some goals.
Well, we're going to talk about the other two matches, West Ham and Luton, in just a moment. We're going to take a very quick ad break, and when we get back, all about the other two matches before getting into your listener questions. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back. All right, Sam. So I think the maybe kind of shorter synopsis, because I don't think we want to force anybody to relive the defeat to West Ham too much, but I think there were a couple of interesting things. One was that this showed, I think, the lack of just an ability to have shots and convert shots with a very high amount of possession, that we were able to, with the 3 center backs, do a pretty solid job in the air, which is on set pieces, which is where Chelsea maybe have struggled previously, outside of adding cheat code James Ward-Prowse to the situation, which made it, I think, a little unfair. Let's just be fair. And then I think the other thing that we talked about on the main pod when we were breaking it down is just the penalty miss that Enzo had, in terms of, really could have completely changed the tide of that game for Chelsea. So why don't you pick one or two of those that you want to jump into a little bit more further?
Yeah, I think it is a bit unfair for us to criticize the West Ham defeat. I think we did play very well in the first half. I mean, 80% possession, and people say, the game isn't won on possession, but it was the kind of possession that frustrated West Ham. You could see Antonio screaming at people to go and press, but West Ham just didn't know what to do. But then you saw the kind of block that they put up. First, they were like at 5-4-1, and then they went to 5-5-0. So even the striker was in midfield, and they covered every single thing from narrow zones to the wide zones. And we just couldn't put crosses into the box because they had 3 huge centre backs, and we couldn't get close for shots because, all of their midfielders work hard. And even the wide guys who are attackers like Bowen, they basically also are very industrious. So we couldn't get close. And then when you look at the Brighton result, which was far worse than what happened to us, I think it's just a fair reflection of how difficult it is to break them down when they're playing that kind of a block. So I would say that it's an aberration if the game stayed at that point. Enzo converts that penalty. I definitely think we would have gone on to win it. They would have been more open. They would have tried to play more expensive, and we would have picked them apart. So I think it was just an unfair reflection of the game. Well done to West Ham, and no doubts about it. But we could have won it, and we didn't. So points dropped.
Yeah, and I think the other point is just I'm going to die on this hill that I would prefer at this point, a striker or someone who takes a very powerful dead ball shot from the penalty spot as the team's designated penalty taker. We moved off from Jorginho.
If you want to find out who that is, please read this week's Londoners Blue podcast Dispatch. I think I've talked about who my preference is for that role. Penalty taker, goals, assists, pretty lively, good age. I think I have the right name in mind, but the money's going to be expensive. So I don't know if you're going to spend it, but like you mentioned, I think that if we do get an upgrade in that central attacking midfield position, somebody who also is able to play on the wing, then he has to be able to take penalties. He has to be able to score, and he has to be able to take at least 3 shots a game with, I would say, an accuracy of about 35-40%.
I'm Right there with you. All of that sounds amazing to me. Let's get it done. We've only got 72 hours left in the transfer window, so
Oh my God.
time's a ticking, Paul and Lawrence. So let's get it figured out. When it comes to the Luton match, which was the first win of the season, it was a clean sheet from Chelsea, involved multiple goals. It felt like a panacea for everything that went wrong last season, that it felt like it really washed away, particularly being at home at Stamford Bridge. You saw all the positive messages and notes from supporters who were at the ground that this was the showing that they've been waiting for, a return to what I would just call dominant football that Chelsea should be able to offer. And while Luton did have moments in the game, they really were there for the taking, and Chelsea just got it done, even with, I think, Nico having like a shot in the first minute, right? Like, Chelsea were there, they were ready to go, even deficient in some positions in terms of first choice players being out to injury or not fully up to speed yet. I mean, this was, I think, the most comprehensive we've seen, and like this, I think, is why maybe the glass is feeling fuller for people right now because of this result. And I think people will couch it because it is against Luton. But at this point, I think you're also looking for just, can this team play together? Can they stitch things together appropriately? And will these combinations that Pochettino has built up with the players he has actually produce the end outcomes we're looking for? And I think this is the first time we saw it end to end in a full 90-minute performance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think somebody told me that this was the highest XG we've accumulated since the 6-0 win against Southampton. So that was pretty encouraging to hear. I think individual performances, most of all, just stood out. Jackson had like 5 shots on the day, which is the best that he's taken in his career since the 2021 season. I mean, we've had data until then when he was playing in the second division for Villarreal second club, but 5 shots is the maximum he's ever had, and he basically did that tally, got a goal. Sterling has been absolutely incredible since the West Ham game. I mean, Liverpool, he showed glimpses, but West Ham, he came alive. Should have had assists, should have had goals, and I think he just looks a different player altogether. We all knew that in preseason he was looking better defensively. He was working very hard, but on the ball, it was just off. He wasn't making the right decisions. He's still a little rusty now, but Pochettino made a comment, saying about, like, Sterling had this interview where he talked about speaking to Pochettino before preseason started, and saying that, I had to play 7 different positions. And then I wasn't very happy playing with my back to goal. And it was just switching a lot of positions over and over again, not making any of those organic relationships. So Poch just said, it doesn't matter if you play left, right, or center. It just, you have to be aggressive. And once you do that, you're unstoppable. And I think that's exactly what he wanted to hear. And we've seen Sterling, I would say, from his Liverpool days. He just looks absolutely electric. He looks like he's gone backwards in time, like Silva had some of that elixir or serum that Silva's been drinking for the last couple of years. And he's just looked rejuvenated. Absolutely amazing. So hopefully that will continue. But I think the most important thing was our first glimpse of what might be a first choice midfield going forward, at least until January, when we have Chukwuemeka and Nkunku back. It was just, I was expecting Gallagher to be the furthest forward and Enzo to be slightly behind and orchestrating from deep. But it turned out it was almost like a 6 with 2 8s. Gallagher being a little more conservative, like I said, a box-to-box midfielder kind of position. But it was Enzo's freedom and the amount of times he was allowed to go near the box and cause havoc, which was pretty encouraging to see. I think Poch trusts him to be a creative and a goal threat. And I think sooner rather than later, we will see him notch up, his first Chelsea goal. So hopefully that comes next game.
Well, fingers crossed that absolutely does, because it would be very, very great to see. I think as we advance, we had a couple of questions. Sasha asking the question just around looking at how these 3 games have manifested and the results that we've achieved and the way that the performances have looked. Has this, where will we finish in the Premier League? And maybe the better way to frame this, Sam, is just like, where was your expectation at the end of preseason, and where is your expectation now? Has it gone up or has it gone down in terms of where you think Chelsea can finish the season in the Premier League?
I think it's remained consistent. I was of the impression that we would finish around top six, hopefully sixth or fifth if we get Champions League, hopefully. So I would say around top six, but fifth or sixth should be the bare minimum, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're not budging on maybe even a little upward momentum on the top four, considering what you've seen of some of the other sides.
No, for certain. I think we need a slightly bigger sample size. We've only seen. Again, I'm also taking into consideration that we don't have a full strength squad. But it's just, I think, me being a little cautious. I've always been like that, but it's just 9 injuries and a festive run to come, and we have that brutal fixture run. I think somewhere in October where we're playing 4 or 5 of the top 6 back to back. I think that spell sort of defines where we finish. But it's also encouraging that we've actually looked very good against Liverpool, considering we do look best when we're in transition and we're running into space behind. So it is going to be, I think, one of the toughest top 4 races of all time. But all of that into consideration, I would say fifth or sixth would be a pretty good achievement for Pochettino in his debut season. And hopefully if we get fifth, then we hit Champions League.
I think I will assess this on the pod we do after the transfer window completes and we know exactly who we've brought in from an attacking perspective. If that does end up reaching the heights of the big name that is currently being, it's not even an actual big name. It is a big name is the filler for who the player is or may be, considering that Fabrizio and others are now touting that about as that Chelsea are looking to do something huge, something splashy at the very end of the window here. So I'm going to say that I'll stay within, I think, the range that you have of like top 6, I think is absolutely where Chelsea will be this year, based upon even looking at some of the other squads that just don't feel fully baked, even as a part of that current top 6. Mm-hmm. I do think that we could push for a top 4 and even maybe a higher performance within that top 4 based upon where we reinforce and how quickly we can get some players back from injury. If we can gel quick enough, I think we are going to be very, very tough to deal with.
So this is factoring in that we signed somebody for that vacant attacking midfield position.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, that's fair enough. I think that's a very accurate assumption to make. I think if that happens, then I would be a little more optimistic and say 4th or 5th, depending on who that signing is. I have, like I said, the guy who's in the dispatch, I'm not going to mention, but I think somebody like an Antoine Griezmann would have been absolutely sensational if he wasn't on astronomical wages and he wasn't as old as he is. But if you can do a deal there, definitely do it. Don't go for the other Atletico attacker. Go for the one that I just mentioned.
There you go. Zarly asking one question, which is, what differences have you noticed in Poch's tactics between these first 3 matches and tenure at Spurs? And are there anything that he seems to be doing better or worse? I feel like, Sam, that we're seeing the same high intensity, the same desire to win the ball, the same desire to play centrally, the way to use the fullbacks and kind of get them to push in on the diagonal to get things moving, to create space. I feel like a lot of the things that he did do at Spurs we're seeing manifest early on, but are there other things that you would want to point out?
I think this is sort of, I think, his 2.0 interpretation of his Tottenham project. I think a lot of the base is similar. The 4-2-3-1 is the same. Then you've got this asymmetrical sort of role in even the pivots, where one is tasked with being the more progressive midfielder, the other being the halfback. I think we've seen that with the interpretation of Enzo and Caicedo, and if you want to sort of switch it around, Gallagher and Caicedo. So I think those things have remained the same. What I feel is the major difference is that in build-up, he switched up a little bit. I think the biggest concern I had before preseason was how well does he cope with sides that are better at pressing and winning the ball back in build-up, and how well does he cope with pressing sides that are better at build-up, because the amount of teams that now have learned to play out from the back compared to the teams that were there when he was at Spurs have increased manifold. So I thought that there would be some kind of disparity there, but he's switched that up. The way that we are pressing is smarter. I also think that he's reduced a little bit of the intensity. Spurs could at sometimes just look absolutely chaotic with the localized press that they have. What we're trying to do is press high, yes, but as soon as we think that it's not going to happen, we retreat and we immediately go into low block and we try to invite the other team in so we get more space to attack. And I think it's happening quicker for us. So he's definitely noticed that that move allows us to conserve more energy and it gives you a little more time to attack. So I think that's the major change. But overall, I would say it's just an interpretation that he's worked on and improved. We are also a lot more narrower than Spurs were. At times in preseason, we just had like 9 or 10 players on the left-hand side of the pitch trying to press and win the ball back. So we are, I would say, a little more vulnerable to switches and to runners, on the furthest side, on the underloaded side. But I think that's a consequence of him trying to win the ball back better, more efficiently. So in some ways we are better, and in some ways we are worse than he was at Spurs.
All right, so with that said, we are going to take our very last ad break. But when we come back, it's all of your listener questions. It's getting into the details of what you wanted to know about, and we will get answers directly from Sam as to what he's thinking about things like, have we solved problems around shooting for last year? I think, spoiler, not necessarily. What do we go do with Gallagher, maybe what some of the loans have looked like that Chelsea have set up, and many, many more questions. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. All right, Sam. So our first question from Hayasaka asking, we weren't particularly creative or nor clinical last year. How have we solved this problem so far this year with either transfers or play style? And I think I would just lead in saying that Chelsea were able to achieve a 50% shot on target rate, 8 total shots on target out of 19 total against Luton. We were nowhere near as clinical in our match against West Ham, where we lost, when we had 4 shots on 17 total on target on total shots of 17, so about 23.5%. And then against Liverpool, it was 40%. So we had 10 total shots with 4 on target. So seemingly Chelsea are in the position where we're still a bit of a mixed bag. The jury's still out. But I think the real prescription here is more shots and more shots on target. And Chelsea aren't necessarily the finished article yet when it comes to either.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I think at one point in time, we had 9 big chances and we missed, I think, 8 of them or something similar to those numbers. So it did look like a throwback to last season. And we did point out that in terms of the forwards that we have, none of them are established finishers. Mudryk definitely isn't. Chukwuemeka, again, somebody who's just growing into the role. Nico Jackson is a wide man, and he had a very good purple patch at the end of the season, but he's still very raw. I think you could see that he's somewhere caught between trying to execute tactical instructions. And I think he was told by Pochettino to shoot on sight. And I don't know which game it was that I was watching back. I think it was Luton, where he got a shot straight from kickoff. We basically hoofed it long and he chased it down and tried to get a shot either himself or for Sterling. So the entire point was try to get as many shots as you can, because in the first couple of games, we were mid-table for quantity and quality. And I think that's something that has to improve and will improve. It's just trying to figure out whether those shots are going to come through, counter-pressing and winning the ball back in good positions, and then immediately, because now we have an upgraded front line in terms of speed and in terms of just getting shots away. I think that will improve. But it's also, I think, if you want pure output, then we will have to improve our finishing, which I think is still some way below being Premier League top 4 standard. But I think that's what Pochettino is betting on, that will improve as we go on. But I think it's just the quality of pressing. It's the quality of attackers that we have that are able to create shots for themselves, and the speed at which we're able to break away. I think that will be decisive this time around, and we weren't last time around.
Got it. So the question from Hokie Karma coming in, is Gallagher really someone that we can want to let go, or is it only if you way overpay, you can get him? And I feel like this is another example of, we've seen Pochettino put together some good press comments. He has played Gallagher in almost a maximum number of minutes allotted. Even, with new players coming in, it feels like Gallagher has proven himself to be a integral part of Pochettino's philosophy being enacted on the pitch, and ultimately, someone who is going to stick around for the season.
So Dan, you know that I was on the Gallagher train before a lot of people. I mean, you were all on it with me, but it's just, I think that he's come to a point where we've looked past his performances under Tuchel, where he made quite a lot of errors in possession, and then he basically, has cleaned up all of those under Pochettino. If you notice the subtle details, he's also shown improvements. He's receiving with both feet. His body position is much better than it used to be. He doesn't look as flat footed when he's receiving in difficult positions. He's also more willing. I think that's the major differentiator. At some point in time when he was playing under Tuchel, he just did not want to receive the ball like Jorginho did, from receiving from the centre backs, turning and then delivering into space or cutting lines with his passing. And I think that's what Gallagher has sort of added to his repertoire. It's come to a point where I rate him extremely highly, yes, but I also know that there is a chance that we can upgrade on him if the right player is available. So he is an excellent squad player. He's somebody who's exceptional to keep around. But if the choice is between an Nkunku, a Kani Chukwuemeka, which this regime bought for 20 million and who basically scored that goal before he got injured, and has been preferred in that role, then if an offer comes in, do you sell? I would say if it's stupid money, where somewhere around 70 million, 65, 70 million, I would say yes. Because I think for that amount of price, you can probably upgrade on Gallagher. You can do it. But I would, at this point in time, with the injuries, with everything that's happening, I would say keep him. And I don't think anybody's going to go as far as to pay 65, 70 for Gallagher. So my verdict would basically be to keep him. He's improving. And I think that, especially in the setup that Pochettino has now found as the box-to-box midfielder who's able to shunt and do everything between both boxes, you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody like him. It's extremely difficult to find a guy with his intensity, to find somebody with his level of off-the-ball work, his pressing triggers, his intelligence. It's very, very tough. And people always look at the on-the-ball actions, but everything that he does in the other 88 minutes, it counts for so much. So I would say that unless a ridiculous offer comes, don't consider it and keep him. I think he's going to be important.
It feels like someone who is going to, if he stays through the end of the window, will likely end up with some type of contract extension and would likely, in under a single year working with Mauricio Pochettino, be worth even more than he is worth right now to a Premier League side. So I feel like if you are even just looking at it from my financial sense and not necessarily what he adds in terms of value to the squad and the way that Pochettino's plan can be enacted, it feels like selling him today is selling him at a discount. And that would be something I would also add as just maybe a little bit of an additional thought on it. Sam, as we round out, last question, Chelsea Football Logic asking what your thoughts are on the Andre Santos loan to Nottingham Forest. Also, I had asked the second question around, is he better than Lavia or Ugo Chukwu? I think that's maybe an unfair question to ask today because Andre Santos has not played in European football as of yet. Lavia has played, within the Premier League. Ugo Chukwu has played, within the European kind of top tier structure. So I don't want to do that yet. I would say that's a question we can park for a few months from now when maybe we're doing something in December and they've hopefully all had an opportunity to play and we could start to make some true comparisons. But just a thought on the Santos loan, particularly with maybe some of the acquisitions that Forest have made, it does feel a little more questionable and maybe just a victim of the fact that Chelsea are in this situation with Hakim Ziyech being on a loan, with Lewis Hall being on a loan, with Lukaku, who just arrived, with the Roma deal being on a loan, that we might have been better off getting him a loan into a top European side. But because of the way that some of these deal structures had to be put together for troublesome players, we do have a couple players who maybe have lost out on the ideal loan, or finding, maybe getting on a loan earlier to be fully embedded in the side at the start of the season and not having to catch up to everyone else.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the tweet refers to a tweet that I put out saying that I believe Lavia is not superior to Andre Santos, because I put out an impulsive tweet about the Nottingham Forest loan. I do believe that we should be thinking carefully about where we want to send him, because he genuinely is one of the most exciting players, young players that I've seen in a long, long time. And it doesn't matter if it's the Brazilian league and if it was the second division. It was just his performances, even on the international circuit for the Brazil youth teams. It just, something about him just clicks. He's mentally years ahead of the age that he's supposed to be. He's extremely well rounded. I would say that his characteristics are unique to him. He's able to be a first phase orchestrator. He's able to play a box to box role. He's also able to crash the box and give you headers. It's something that I would say Lavia and Ugochukwu can't do. I wanted to say that he's more well rounded than both those players. I say that Lavia has clearly well defined defensive weaknesses, and I believe some of them won't go away. I don't think that they can be worked on, but I do think that he gets better in a very good system. And I do think technically receiving in tight spaces, like we said in the Premier League, he's tried, tested, and already showing world-class potential. So it's not a matter of whether one's better than the other, but my entire debate around this was, if Lavia costs you 60 million and if Andre Santos comes for 20 million, and if both start competing for the same spot, are you going to play the 20 million guy if he performs better than your 60 million one? And my argument was no, because you're always going to look out for your more expensive asset. And that's why I was against the Lavia deal. If it was for around 35, 40 million, which I think his value is good for, I would have been absolutely on point with it. But I think that by paying what we paid for him, and we're actually paying for the player that we envision he will become. So it's an unfair thing to do to both Ugochukwu and Andre Santos, where if it was between developing one player or the other, then you had to send the less expensive player on loan, and which is what has happened to Andre Santos. So I hope I'm wrong about this, and I hope that Steve Cooper does us a huge favor and gives him 15, 20 minutes. I've talked to a couple of Nottingham Forest fans, and they tell me that the young midfielder Orel Mangala has been a little inconsistent, and they're also selling Remo Freuler to Bologna, I think. So they're effectively going to have maybe 2-3 central midfielders if everything goes right, and if they don't get Ndidi or Yusuf Fofana. So hopefully he will get minutes. But it's a huge ask to break into a senior side at that age in the Premier League. Colville did it first in the Championship, which I think would have been a good option. But yeah, that's my main gripe. I don't want to compare, but I would say that I am a little disenchanted right now. I will absolutely take everything back and happily be quiet if he gets the minutes that he deserves.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll clip this, we'll send it over to Cooper's people, and he'll just do the right thing and get Andre Santos a fair number of minutes this season. But until then, that is what we're going to have to hope for. But hopefully you enjoyed this episode. It's a little bit of a different one that we've put together here, taking a look at the early days of the Pochettino era at Chelsea. The aura is strong, as we mentioned in our match review against Luton, and it's exciting times. So look forward to the end of the transfer window. Look forward to more updates from Sam and myself and others on the podcast as we look to get you and keep you informed about what's going on, all things Chelsea. And Sam, as you make a little bit of a trip into Europe in the coming days, I think on behalf of all our listeners, I want to wish you a very safe bit of travel.
Thank you so much, Dan. I mean, it's exciting, definitely, to go and explore Europe for the first time. Also hoping to catch a couple of games in Austria and in Czech Republic. So that'll be a good experience, and hopefully do some nice scouting while I'm there, and then bring some more talents for the Bowley Consortium, working for free. How nice.
I'm sure Blue Claw would take any more of your recommendations. It's not like they haven't taken one or two before. At least that's what we assume. But that's going to do it for this episode, listeners. Thank you so much again for supporting the podcast and listening. And until next time, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.